I don't play with lions. I don't play with those. I don't even do roller coasters. Wow.
Well, hello.
Welcome to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, and I am really looking forward to a discussion that I will have with friend of the show, Ken Klippenstein, in the second hour of the show today. I will be interviewing him on his ongoing, what feels like series of reports in regard to the United States inching ever so close to a minority report type situation. Pre-crime, yeah. Authorities going after Americans for pre-crime. It's here. It's not really getting much attention from legacy journalists, but Ken Klippenstein continues to do excellent reporting on that. So we will have him on the show in the second hour to discuss that. Of course, we've got some pretty big updates in the ongoing Iranian war. We will also give you some updates on the testimony by Anthony Fauci before the Senate Armed Services Committee. No, it wasn't the Armed Services Committee, but he did testify before the Senate today. And I'm honestly beside myself over his behavior, and we'll get into all of that a little bit in this first hour of the show. But as always, just want to encourage you to like and share the stream if you're watching us live. For our members, we will be getting into a video featuring one of my favorite drop site reporters, Julian Andreoni, and the fact that he had to deal with one of the most juvenile, ridiculous senators imaginable. So we're gonna show you some video of that and discuss and have a little bit of a good time making fun of said senator. So tyt.com/join to become a member. And one other thing I wanted to remind you all of, if you're watching and you're wondering, hey, you know what, I'm subscribed to TYT. Why don't I get notifications? You guys are uploading all this content that I don't even get to see. because I'm not notified about it. You just got to ring that bell. By ringing that bell in the digital sense, I mean, just click the bell icon and then you'll get the notifications. All right, well, without further ado, let's get started with what can only be described as further escalation and expansion of a devastating war in the Middle East.
President Trump tells Fox News about Iran, "We are going to beat the effing S out of them." He went on to say, "We'll be hitting them hard. They're going to get a beating." So clearly the United States is going to respond to what the president described as a surprise attack. He says US forces had just minutes to shoot down these incoming Iranian ballistic missiles.
Well, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps has carried out a surprise strike against the United States Air Base in Jordan, which really does mark the first time Iran has decided to carry out an offensive attack against a US base. Now, when it comes to surprise attacks, as we know, the United States certainly specializes in that. But in this case, it was the Iranians who decided to escalate the situation following news that Donald Trump had decided to pause bombing Iran due to the fact that we're running low on interceptor missiles. So news hits that Trump was convinced to stop bombing because of the interceptor missile situation. That is a vulnerability that Trump knew about a year in advance, by the way, and I'm gonna prove that by providing the receipts in just a bit. We should have never started the war, but now it appears Iran has us cornered because of the lack of military capabilities necessary to effectively respond for a prolonged period of time. We should have never entered this war. Let's be very clear about that. Now, it is likely that Iran is willing to gamble on this escalation due to the fact that Trump continues to make all sorts of unhinged threats against Iran's civilian infrastructure. And then he likes to couple that with the reality that we're low on missile interceptors. How is that a smart thing to do as the leader of this country? It's not, it's a dumb thing to do. But something tells me that we're in for a long series of dumb things Trump likes to do. So earlier Wednesday, Iran said it had targeted a US base in Jordan in response to aggressive actions by the US military, and Jordan said its air defenses intercepted 5 Iranian missiles. Now, Trump said that the US only had minutes to respond and be able to intercept those attacks from the Iranians. But nonetheless, as you heard in the video earlier, Donald Trump did in fact say that there will be a response, there will be retaliation. And of course, he used the foul language in order to send that message to the Iranians. Now, the New York Times reported that just last week, hundreds of Jordanian political, legal, and other figures actually signed this open letter to their government, and they're trying to send a message to the United States as well. This was a letter that they signed last week. So this is prior to the latest escalation featuring Iran doing a surprise strike on a US military base in Jordan. But the reason why they put this letter out is because unlike the Jordanian government, the people of Jordan want the United States out of their country. And I don't begrudge them for wanting that. I would want that as well, because simply hosting US military bases in your country, especially if you happen to be in the Middle East, essentially ends up making you a target. It'll drag your country into a war that they shouldn't be involved in. And that's what the people of Jordan, at least when it comes to this letter, are trying to communicate here. So this is a rare rebuke and public challenge to the Jordanian government. And I just want to give you a quick excerpt of it where they say, quote, "We maintain that their presence exposes Jordan to security, political, and economic risks that serve no national interest and increases the likelihood of our country being dragged into a regional conflict to which it is not a party." Something tells me that our Gulf allies certainly feel the same way. At least the people living in those countries feel the same way. And I've been saying for quite some time now that the governments or the leadership in these countries are in no way indicative of how the people of these countries feel about Israel or about hosting US military bases. Now, the presence of US forces and these bases has basically exposed the Jordanians to danger, including, by the way, debris falling from Iranian missiles that are intercepted. there's all sorts of material that ends up dropping from the sky. And I think there's this big misconception that, well, as long as the missiles are intercepted, everything's good. No, and by the way, these are missiles that are being intercepted on behalf of Israel because that's where the missiles are going. So they get intercepted above Jordan's territory. And then you have, all of the material from that interception falling onto the heads of the Jordanian people, and that's dangerous. So that's like best case scenario if they continue hosting a US airbase in Jordan. Now, it does look like Trump has already made good on his promise to retaliate against Iran, but Iran has responded to that retaliation. So at least when it comes to Iranian-backed groups through the region, it looks like Trump has targeted them for now. And what do I mean by that? Well, this is actually a huge escalation as it pertains to Saudi Arabia, because after Iran carried out a surprise attack on that US airbase in Jordan, the United States and Saudi Arabia actually carried out joint strikes targeting Iranian-backed forces in Iraq. Yeah, you heard that right, Iraq. Saudi Arabia has been doing whatever it can to just stay out of all of this. They want to de-escalate, but now they have chosen to enter the war, carrying out joint strikes alongside the United States against Iranian-backed groups in where? In Iraq. Okay, so we're back in Iraq. How fun. Now, this does mark the first time that Saudi Arabia has entered this war, US Central Command, and they haven't been as forthright with us in some ways. So I just want to be clear about that. This is fog of war type stuff, and I want you to be careful with what you believe and what you disbelieve. But this is what they're saying. US Central Command said in a statement that the two militaries hit logistics and weapon sites across eastern Iraq in response to more than 30 drone attacks directed by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in recent days. A US official said that Tuesday night's US-Saudi strikes in Iraq had killed about 20 Iranian advisors, a combination of members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and technical advisors, the official said, speaking on condition of anonymity. Now, the sites in Iraq were allegedly deliberately targeted for that reason, as well as to knock out the ability of Iran-backed militias to launch missiles and drones. So unclear whether or not they actually succeeded in doing away with that capability from Iraq's territory. But the entire global community, let's not make any mistake about this, is already suffering severe consequences for this incredibly stupid war that President Trump decided to carry out against Iran beginning on February 28th at the behest of Israel. And what do I mean by that? Well, already we know that oil and gas infrastructure in the Gulf has been targeted and destroyed. We already know that the Strait of Hormuz has been blocked. We already know that the Houthis are now carrying out strikes in the Red Sea and have effectively blocked the Bab al-Mandab Strait, and they're targeting specifically Saudi vessels that are attempting to transit, in that area and transport fuel. So that's going to have a negative impact on the economy, and it's certainly going to limit the supply of oil and liquefied natural gas. And so the latest on that, by the way, is that two ships, one of them a US-owned gas storage tanker, caught fire after an explosion at a shipping hub on Wednesday in Egypt, according to Kepler, a maritime tracking firm. I just love the way our media here in the United States frames things. It caught fire after an explosion. Oh, really? Okay, was it bombed? Like, what happened here? Now, to be fair, at the time of this reporting, first of all, the good news is that there were no injuries or deaths. That's the good news. But at the time of the reporting, I guess the New York Times didn't feel like they had the appropriate or sufficient confirmation of what actually happened to those tankers in order to claim that it was hit by a drone. But President Trump spoke to reporters in the Oval Office and said that an attack on Iran was coming in response to their attack on a US-owned liquefied natural gas carrier in Egypt. He said that he had been briefed and that, quote, we're going to be hitting them very hard because it's our turn to hit them. I know you're going to hit them very hard. We've heard that over and over and over again. Unclear what that would accomplish. But the latest escalation involving Saudi Arabia could mean that the Saudis might soon allow the United States to use their bases to directly attack Iran. Now, the Saudi defense minister spoke to Axios, had a meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance, and the current reporting, and take it with a grain of salt because it is reported by Barak Ravid over at Axios. His reporting indicates that the Saudis do not want to escalate. They would like to de-escalate. But here's the thing. You don't say that you want to de-escalate when you just carried out joint strikes with the United States against Iranian-backed militia groups in Iraq, you know? So that being said, anyone who's maybe celebrating the notion that, the Saudis might allow the United States to use their land, their bases in order to directly strike Iran, we still have a big problem here. And that big problem is the fact that we've still depleted our missile interceptors. So what good does that do us if we do not have the capacity to shoot down missiles that are directed at our military, at our soldiers, at our military bases? How does that make any sense? So let's talk about the reality of the missile interceptors, because there's one expert that I listened to who, had a theory that kind of worried me a little bit. And the theory was, no. The US government is actually lying about the fact that their missile interceptors have been depleted. They're doing that in order to trick the Iranians, but that's not true. And the reason why I know that's not true is because our military was already low on missile interceptors well before Trump decided to launch the Iran war on February 28th. How do I know that? Well, there's one thing that Congress does do. They don't really pass laws or regulations or anything, any policy that benefits our lives, but they do love to have kabuki theater hearings. And one of those hearings actually took place last year on June 8th, featuring Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll. And the secretary actually addressed the very huge problem that we have with the depletion of missile interceptors during that Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. Let's take a quick look at that.
President Trump recently said we need to take a long, hard look at defense procurement and our defense industrial base because it's been withering down to nothing. Given all the money we spend on the Pentagon, it's unacceptable that we would ever run out of ammunition or be unable to quickly produce the weapons we need. You also acknowledged our munitions crisis at your confirmation hearing. You said one of the greatest problems facing our time is getting our munitions and getting our magazines back up to where they need to be. I assume 3 months on to the job, you still believe that addressing the nation's munitions crisis is vital if we are to deter and, if necessary, fight and win a war against China?
Absolutely, Senator. And I would even update and say it is, after 100 days of seeing it, it is worse than I thought at my confirmation hearing.
I think we've also learned pretty definitively over the last 3 years of the Ukraine war that our commercial industrial base, while vital, simply doesn't have the capacity to produce all the munitions that our nation needs and that our allies need, much less what we would need in a major conflict.
So that was Senator Tom Cotton. And if you paid close attention, in the beginning of that video, Tom Cotton makes reference to President Donald Trump being concerned about our munitions crisis. That hearing was on June 8th, 2025. Yet he still decided a year later, not even a year later, less than a year later. So this is June 2025. By February of 2026, knowing that we had depleted our interceptors, President Donald Trump decides to go to war with Iran. How does that make any sense? How does that make any sense? It doesn't. Which, by the way, brings me to Ukraine and the incredibly stupid gamble that they just engaged in. And I'm gonna keep calling it stupid because that's what it is. So this all makes Ukraine's decision to strike an Iranian vessel in the Caspian Sea earlier this week which some experts, by the way, believe they're doing in an attempt to merge the wars. So deeply moronic, so deeply moronic. Now, look, I know that there are people in the audience who have a great deal of sympathy for the Ukrainians. And so, by the way, I do also have great sympathy for Ukrainian civilians. But we got to call a spade when it comes to Zelensky and how deeply irresponsible he is. Because a lot of you, not a lot of you, some of you were like, no, man, Ukraine's got the interceptors. They've got the interceptors. They're better than the interceptors the US makes. Do they? Do they? Because get a load of this. Zelensky to Axios. Ukraine needs missile interceptors to head off winter disaster. Now, usually I take Barack Ravid's reporting with a grain of salt, but in this case, Zelensky literally had an interview with Axios. So we got a sense of what's actually taking place with this ongoing war in Ukraine. So Zelensky met with Trump yesterday, as we shared with you all, and he asked him for an emergency winter package. Okay, the emergency winter package, ladies, is not what you think it is. Okay, it's nothing fun. So the winter package is of Patriot air defense interceptors to thwart Russian attacks. As Axios notes, the war with Iran has also drawn down US stockpiles of Patriot interceptors, making it difficult to sell them to Ukraine. Not making it difficult, Barack, okay? Making it impossible to sell them to Ukraine. We don't even have enough interceptors for our own stupid war against Iran. So impossible is the right word, impossible. But he further writes that Zelensky said Trump agreed during their Tuesday meeting to move ahead with the Patriot production licenses. Okay, so that would allow for Ukraine to build their own missile interceptors. After his White House visit, Zelensky said he met with representatives of Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, both of which produce Patriot interceptors, to discuss the issue. Okay, great. If they're gonna get the license, then everything's gonna be okay. Except it's not, because as I've been repeatedly saying on this show over and over again, even if Ukraine obtains the licenses, it would take 1 to 5 years to produce large sums of interceptors. Zelensky is apparently pissed because he says that timeline just doesn't work for me. It doesn't matter if that timeline doesn't work for you. The facts are the facts, and you have to have an understanding of what the munitions crisis is, how long it takes to build interceptors. But unfortunately, we're living in a world where various countries are being led by morons. So he wants 300 missile interceptors by winter, 300. And he says, we need the Patriots yesterday. You know, I need to look like a supermodel, but guess what? That's not gonna happen, okay? You gotta face reality. So look, the reason why I bring this up is because, again, deciding to enter the war against Iran by striking an Iranian vessel in the Caspian Sea was a really stupid move. And I just want people to validate that point of view because it's the accurate point of view. So we'll see where this all goes, but all signs point to more escalation. All signs point to a global energy crisis. All signs point to devastating inflation. And there's no end in sight. But the Israelis certainly are happy, aren't they? We got to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about that hearing featuring Anthony Fauci today. It is disturbing to say the least, so don't miss it. What's up, everybody? Welcome to our first social break of the day. We've got Crazy Lit Asian who says dead senators Lindsey Graham with his constant warmongering and John McCain with his bomb Iran song are still affecting us beyond the grave. I mean, I don't think so. I think the problem is we still have so many people who think the way Lindsey Graham thought in Congress right now, and we need to get them out. It's that simple. Although it's not simple, it's actually very difficult, as we've learned through, all the weaselly ways and corrupt ways that these primary elections play out. Progressive Entropy in our Twitch community says the war is growing and more countries are getting drawn in. This is not looking good, folks. I mean, obviously, I agree with you 100%. John Mearsheimer makes this point repeatedly, and I think it's the best point, and it's a good general point as it pertains to wars, whether you start them or not. It's easy to start a war. It is very difficult to exit a war. And that's what we're finding ourselves in today. What Trump did to Venezuela wasn't a war. He kidnapped, he made a deal, okay, with members of the Venezuelan government in order to allow for an operation that would allow for us to essentially kidnap Nicolas Maduro. That's not a war. What Trump started on February 28th is a war against a country that our government has consistently underestimated. I think it's the best word, totally underestimated. So Trump just underestimated them way worse than previous administrations. Look, as much as you want to see my face, I want you to take a look at this graphic for our partner, Noble Mobile, because are your kids looking at their screens more than each other? Pay your family members to use their phones less. With Noble, you can reward your entire family for using their phones less, and additional lines are only $40 a month. For that monthly price, you each get up to $20 in cash back. Plus, you can create a family leaderboard to compare cash back and the brain rot index each month. Same great Noble coverage, unlimited data, half the cost of the big guys, plus cash back. And you also get international coverage, which a lot of cell services don't offer. So check it out. You can get all the details over at tyt.com/switch. I want to go to a comment from a member of our Twitch community because I think this is absolutely true. Rad Rocket says, war is never based in rational thinking. Yeah, I mean, I think the rational thing to do is find ways to prevent the war from taking place at all. And then you have Canadian Skull Dragon who says, the holy war that sparks World War III. Yeah, things are bad. Things are real bad. So I wish I had positive news to share when it comes to the ongoing and expanding war, but I just don't. And so we're in a bad place right now. And you also have to keep in mind, someone else wrote about the strategic oil reserves, and we are strategic petroleum reserve. Once that runs out, guys, and we're very close to that, oil prices are going to skyrocket. And that translates to higher gas prices at the pump. That translates to overall inflation because, of course, you need fuel to transport goods and services. So yeah, we're in a bad place. Okay, Jim Huggett, one of our members writes something to troll me, I'm hoping. Obama, Trump 2028. Who even are you? Who even are you? Anyway, let's get to the Anthony Fauci story because I was curious what his testimony today was going to look like. And well, not great. Take a look.
Given Senator Paul's obvious obsession with calling for my prosecution, his repeated slanderous comments about me, and recently his publicly releasing my unredacted personal diary aimed at embarrassing and intimidating me, the only conclusion I can reach is that the sole reason he is calling me before this committee is to get me to say something, anything that could vindicate his repeated public pledges that I end up, in his words, quote, behind bars.
That was just a little taste of Anthony Fauci's opening statement as he testified before the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. Now, unfortunately, his opening statement was really the only time he said anything at all, because he invoked his Fifth Amendment right over and over again for the remainder of the hearing. Now, Senator Josh Hawley called it out pretty aggressively. Take a look.
Fifth, huh, Doc? Let's try something. What day of the week is it today?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color tie are you wearing?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color's the carpet in front of you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Let's just get one thing straight. You don't have any rights under the Fifth Amendment because you've been pardoned, as you very well know. As the Supreme Court has been clear for a century and more, Brown versus Walker, 1896, when he has been pardoned, he may not stand upon his privilege. You know that. Your lawyers sitting behind you now shifting nervously in their chairs. They know it. This isn't about the Constitution. This isn't about the law. This is about contempt.
So yesterday, when we were covering Fauci's diary entries on the show, I had totally forgotten about the fact that former President Joe Biden had done these blanket pardons before leaving office, and he did preemptively pardon Anthony Fauci before leaving office. And so when I was talking about the need to prosecute Fauci, it turns out you can't prosecute Fauci thanks to Joe Biden's pardon. Now, why would I want to prosecute Fauci? Well, those diary entries, which were released by Senator Rand Paul, ahead of this hearing, indicated that Fauci lied to the American people about a lot of things, including the origin of the coronavirus. So we went over that. I'll go over it again in just a minute. But if he is safe from prosecution, now would be a great time to be forthright with the American people. But he decided against doing that. And it really does show him for who he really is. And it's pretty devastating because there are a lot of people in this country, myself included, who put a lot of trust in him at a time of chaos, panic, at a time of instability in our federal government where we didn't know who to trust. And he took advantage of Americans at a time when we were deeply vulnerable and terrified. So listen, when we covered this story yesterday, apparently some people were so offended that we would dare to tell the truth after coming across new information about Anthony Fauci that they've unsubscribed. And that, okay, if you don't want to know the truth, that's totally fine. But for those who do want to know the truth, because it's important to prevent this kind of stuff from happening in the future, think about the number of people who died. Think about the number of people who literally lost everything. You know, someone I grew up with who worked her ass off. I mean, she was working from like 14, okay? Because she wanted to, like she wanted to learn how to style and dye hair. And she wanted to own, her biggest dream was to own a hair salon. She worked really hard and actually accomplished that. COVID destroyed it. She now does not have a business. And she's just one person who experienced that. So many Americans lost everything as a result of how our government handled its response to the pandemic. And we need to learn from that. We need to prevent that from happening again in the future. But unfortunately, we're not dealing with people who have the best interests of the people of this country in mind. Anyway, so look, the point of this hearing was to, dive into the origins of and the governmental response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, Fauci's refusal to cooperate did not mean there were no spicy moments in this hearing. Now, Republican Senator Bernie Moreno, who's he's a Republican from Ohio, engaged in a pretty fiery rant about Fauci. And so before we get to the clip, I want to give you some context. Moreno said he decided to run for office soon after learning that a woman was arrested at an Ohio middle school football game in 2020 for refusing to wear a mask, which was reportedly against the school's policy at the time. Now, with that in mind, here's more of what Moreno had to say to Anthony Fauci.
I cannot stand idly on the side and watch this happen. It was about 6 years ago today that I decided I'm going to give up my businesses, sell them all, run for office, run for the United States Senate. Here I am sitting in front of you 6 years later saying, who the do you think you were for doing that? It is a total disgrace what you did to this country. There is no defense of what you did. You may have had a 50+ year legacy of public service, but it ends in total and complete disgrace. So let me ask you an opportunity to answer one question. Will you apologize, just apologize, to the people who you harmed through your actions? Will you say, do you have the dignity to just say you're sorry?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
So for me, there's so many things that we learned from his journal entries that were infuriating. But for me, one of the most infuriating things was how he would publicly deny that there was a lab leak that led to this virus spreading. Okay, publicly, he called these people lunatics, conspiracy theorists. No. The virus originated from a wet market in China. That's what he said. Then we learn in his journal, he said something entirely different. Now, we're gonna revisit that. But first, I just wanna say, the Democrats in this committee defended Fauci despite what we learned from the journal entries. And I just wanna understand, why is this a partisan issue? Why is this a partisan issue? This shouldn't be a partisan issue. This should be an issue where you look at the evidence, you look at his conduct, and you stick to the facts. But the turning a global pandemic into a partisan issue is one of the dumbest things imaginable. But that's what we do in this country. They turned it into a culture war, when in reality, this has to do with questions of life and death. It has to do with questions of how the government should respond, whether or not the government should fund something known as gain of function research. And if they do fund it, what type of gain of function research is okay to pursue? But we're not having that conversation, are we? So a group of 155 scientists, doctors, and public health advocates also signed a letter defending Fauci. I don't know if they read any of Fauci's journal entries, but they wanted to defend Fauci while painting the scientific community as victims of the Trump administration. Now, look, I agree, the Trump administration has not been friendly to scientists. However, this is not the right context to make that argument, okay? So they say in the letter alleges that the Trump administration and its congressional allies are waging a war on individual scientists through public harassment, arrests. I don't know who they're referring to when they talk about arrests. Anthony Fauci has never been arrested. Criminal indictment and ongoing threats of prosecution. Anthony Fauci, let me remind you, was preemptively pardoned by Joe Biden before he left office, okay? Multiple, so that's what they say. They say the charges against Dr. Fauci are baseless, suggesting he covered up, this is the important part, suggesting he covered up the origins of COVID, that he bribed or persuaded other scientists to join his cover up, that NIAID funded research sparked the pandemic, that he personally holds patents on the virus, and that he's working with intelligence agencies to suppress the true story of the pandemic, the letter states. No credible evidence has been produced to support these absurd charges, except there has been credible evidence, and that credible evidence comes in the form of Dr. Anthony Fauci's own journal entries. So were they false? Were they totally manufactured? Are they fake? Because Anthony Fauci doesn't say that those journal entries are fake. And in fact, maybe we should take a look at those journal entries again so you guys get a sense of what I'm talking about here. So as we shared with you yesterday, Senator Rand Paul released thousands of pages from Fauci's journal. Now you might be wondering, well, how did Senator Paul get his hands on Fauci's journal? Fauci wrote these journal entries on a government computer, thus making it available for freedom of information request. It belongs to the government. Okay, that's how we have it. So from his journal, we learned that only a few scientists, 2 scientists in fact, early on in the pandemic, real early on in the pandemic, were open to his theory that COVID was a naturally developed virus that jumped from animal to human in a wet market in China. Only 2. The others were like, this looks like a lab leak. So the rest suspected the virus might have been created artificially, not least because a leading scientist in Wuhan, Shi Zhengli, was known to engage in the sort of gain of function research that could produce such a result. Now let's get to Fauci's diary entry. The diary suggests that by January 26, 2020, so this is even before the lockdowns happened, okay? Dr. Fauci believed the virus had not originated in the Wuhan wet market, often identified as the source by natural origin advocates. This did not stop him and allies from painting skeptics of the natural origin theory as politicized cranks and conspiracy theorists. I remember early on in the pandemic, after the lockdowns had happened and we had a shortage of masks, Dr. Anthony Fauci told the American people, oh, you don't need masks. Don't worry, you don't need masks. And the reason why he said that is because we had a severe mask shortage and we had to save whatever masks we did have for frontline healthcare workers. But when you say that, what it does is it dissuades Americans from using N95 masks once you have enough of them to encourage Americans to use them. Regardless of his conduct or lies, again, preemptively, he was pardoned by Biden. And now we all know why. We all know why. By the way, the reason why he kept pleading the fifth is because he didn't want to perjure himself during this hearing. Had he perjured himself, well, then there could be charges against him that he hasn't been pardoned for. So he knew what he was doing. Anyway, sorry if this news, which is easily verifiable, offends anybody, but I think we should all know the truth, and this is unfortunately the truth. And by the way, I wanted to go to one other thing. I want to go to the next video because Anthony Fauci had perjured himself previously. Now he's been given a blanket pardon by Biden. The video that you're about to see is from May 11th, 2021. But this is the kind of stuff that he was saying to the American people during these congressional hearings that were just brazen lies. Take a look.
Dr. Fauci, do you still support funding of the NIH funding of the lab in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, with all due respect, you are entirely and completely incorrect that the NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain of function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Do they fund Dr. Barrick?
We do not fund.
Do you fund Dr. Barrick's gain of function research?
Dr. Barrett does not doing gain of function research, and if it is, it's according to the guidelines, and it is being conducted in North Carolina.
You don't think inserting a bat virus spike protein that he got from the Wuhan Institute into the SARS virus is gain of function?
That is
you would
not
be in the minority because at least 200 scientists have signed a statement from the Cambridge Working Group saying that it is gain of function.
Well, it is not.
So he lied during that hearing. And how do we know that? The hearing took place May 11th, 2021. By September 9th, 2021, The Intercept, not a right-wing publication, The Intercept got their hands on some incredibly important documents. And what those documents indicated was that and this was reported by Newsweek at the time, Fauci was untruthful to Congress about Wuhan lab research, new documents appear to show. So again, those were documents obtained by The Intercept, and Newsweek interviewed someone by the name of Richard Ebright, Board of Governors Professor of Chemistry and Chemical Biology at Rutgers University and Laboratory Director at the Waxman Institute of Microbiology. So they interviewed him and asked him, like, take a look at these documents and tell us what your take is, since you're an expert at this, right? And what he found, what he told Newsweek, was that these documents show unequivocally that NIH grants were used to fund controversial gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China. He also said that the documents make it clear that assertions by the NIH director, Francis Collins, and the NIAID director, Anthony Fauci, that the NIH did not support gain-of-function research or potential pandemic pathogen enhancement in Wuhan are untruthful. So that was the reality. That has been the reality. And I don't know why we're not allowed to know the truth about the US funding gain-of-function research. Maybe it's because it's so highly controversial. And the reason why it's controversial is if you're dealing with highly contagious pathogens, there could be an accident and there could be a lab leak. And by the way, I'm not the only person who's saying this. Of course, our intelligence community have looked into this themselves. I remember when the FBI report came out and said, it's more likely than not that this originated from a lab leak. Anyway, so that's where we are. It's important to know the truth, and that's what this is. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about how much Americans hate Benjamin Netanyahu. What's up, everybody? Let's go to Claimer86, who provides the perfect opportunity for me to say something that grinds my gears. So I'll read the comment first. Hey, Anna, I have some pushback on TYT's recent take on Alex Jones. On X this month, he, alongside Elon, were pushing Zionist slop, calling for Sneeko to be deported after he trolled them in response to their anti-Muslim rhetoric. So I don't know if you noticed, but as we were talking about that story yesterday, we were specifically addressing the fact that he wants to invoke the 25th Amendment to get rid of Trump or to impeach him. And in the context of talking about that, both Cenk and I said repeatedly, over and over again, we don't agree with Alex Jones on everything. And I hate that I have to caveat every time I talk about someone like Alex Jones with that when he's saying something that we agree with. Obviously, we don't agree with everything Alex Jones says, not even close, not even close. That was like a little sliver of something he said that we do agree with, and that's it, it's that simple. By the way, if you don't mind, write back and give me the deets on Sneeko, because I don't really know like who that guy is. I've heard some pretty bad things about him, but then I've also seen some good things about him. I don't have the time to research online personalities. So if you don't mind, let me know what you genuinely think about him. Anyway, Elliot writes in and says, I think we were using the cover of negotiations to move our bombers and tankers into the Middle East, and Iran attacked preemptively. The low interceptors may have been unrelated. Oh, that's a really interesting take. I got to look into that, but thank you. I appreciate that perspective. And we're out of time. I'll see you right back on the show. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Free meatballs and linguine has probably my favorite comment of the day. Nobody F's around in the Caspian Sea. The reason why it's my favorite is because Caspian does sound very similar to my last name. And every time I see a story about the Caspian Sea, I'm like, it's Caspian Sea. Anyway, love that comment. Thank you for writing in. Let's get to our next story.
You've got this lunatic mayor in New York thinking you may get arrested if you go to New York, which will never happen.
First of all, I'm going to New York.
Yeah.
Look, I'm definitely going there. I'm going to speak the truth in front of this. You know, there's just hate spewing elected official who's pitting one group of New Yorkers against the others. He's turning them against New York Jews. I mean, what are we, in the 1930s? What is this, you know? So much hate, so many lies.
Speaking of hate, despite the fact that so many Americans in general hate Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and do not welcome him into our country, certainly that's the case in New York City, he wants to come visit New York anyway, just to troll Mamdani, just to do what Netanyahu does best, make people loathe him more. But more and more Americans are in fact turning on the genocidal war criminal, and he may not be untouchable for long. Just keep that in mind. Now, in the past, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani has threatened to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu if he stepped foot in the Big Apple, since there's a ICC, International Criminal Court, warrant out for his arrest because he's committed crimes against humanity, he's a war criminal, and he's just an overall bad guy. Now, when it was announced that Benjamin Netanyahu would be attending the UN General Assembly in September, Mamdani wanted to follow through with that promise. But as many of you probably already know, he does not have the legal authority to do that. And in fact, we here in the United States, our government at least, not the people, do not respect the ICC and do not feel the ICC has any jurisdiction whatsoever over the United States. But Mamdani is really putting out a moral message there. And in fact, he's still calling for Netanyahu's arrest. Take a look at this.
Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal, the architect of a horrific genocide against the Palestinian people. He is responsible for the killing of more than 73,000 people, for the maiming of tens of thousands of children as those who survive undergo amputation without anesthesia, for the targeting of neonatal hospitals and maternity care centers, denying newborns even the chance to live, for the countless people he starved as he blocked food and humanitarian aid from reaching them, for the gunning down of hundreds of aid workers and journalists. As I've said, I agree with the ICC that Benjamin Netanyahu should be arrested and tried for his crimes, as I do for anyone else charged by the ICC. My administration has reviewed every avenue available under applicable law to determine whether New York City could execute the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant if Benjamin Netanyahu came here. It is clear that we do not have the independent legal authority to enforce this warrant. The federal government, however, does, and I call on them to join the ICC and execute this warrant. And I want to be equally clear. Benjamin Netanyahu is not welcome in New York City, nor is any other war criminal at large. While we cannot end the genocide on our own, we can decide whether our silence will become another weapon, and we can examine every tool we have to defend the humanity and dignity of all people.
So not only did I appreciate the fact that we have at least some elected politicians in this country who have a moral leg to stand on, there's also the cherry on top where you have all these Israel firsters like whining and crying about it. So let's just kind of revel in the chorus of whining morons before we move on with this story.
Whether it's his calls for the arrest of Netanyahu or urging New Yorkers to come out and protest Netanyahu, it's the same thing. It just shows how juvenile, immature, and really the lack of experience that this mayor has.
Jim, the declaration of the mayor is baseless. We all know it. It's a stunt. He wants to distract the attention from his failures running the city, and he picks on the prime minister. He knows the law. Like all of us. And if you want to arrest someone, I think we should arrest Mayor Mamdani.
The arrest warrant that he wants enforced is from a fake court that the United States doesn't even recognize and is not a part of. He's literally trying to destroy the policy of the United States.
We have a great police commissioner, Jewish. She's certainly not going to arrest Netanyahu. So there's no possibility of this. It's just stupid theatrics.
Stupid theatrics. You're right, by the way. He may, because of his threats, he may already be guilty.
I'd love to have been in the room when someone explained you're not president of the United States. It's like watching some kid play dress up in the oversized clothing of his parents. I mean, he's the mayor of a city, and he doesn't have the authority to go around arresting international figures, let alone heads of state.
Look at their glee over the fact that Mamdani doesn't have the legal authority to arrest a literal war criminal who committed genocide, continues to commit genocide, and keeps bombing countries in the region to steal land, expand Israel's territory. Like they are so happy to be on the record filleting a disgusting war criminal. It's hilarious to me. They're so disgusting. But anyway, then you have the Democrats who are mixed on this whole notion of arresting Netanyahu. A lot of them are corrupt. A lot of them take AIPAC money. So they're going to go ahead and regurgitate pro-Israel talking points. Let's just take a quick look at that.
Congresswoman, can you tell us what you think about Mamdani's plan to explore whether he can arrest Netanyahu in New York? Do you think that's a good idea? Think about that.
Arrest him. He's a war criminal.
Does he even have the authority to explore the arrest of Netanyahu?
I don't know if it applies to citizen's arrest. If he needs help, tell him to call me.
What do you think of Mayor Mamdani exploring ways to arrest Netanyahu? Do you think that's a good idea?
I didn't see that. I don't know anything that he said, so I'll check it out.
Can you tell us what you think of Mamdani and what he's saying about possibly arresting Netanyahu? Do you have an opinion on that? Do you think he should be exploring that?
He can't do it. It would violate the UN. There's a treaty.
I think that whether or not he has the authority about it, I don't really have an opinion on what Mamdani is saying or what he's doing. But I do think that Netanyahu is a war criminal.
My view on Netanyahu is the same as my view on Putin. If you have a warrant for your arrest by the ICC and you're coming here, not to the UN, because the UN has its own rules, but you're coming to the United States, then you should be arrested.
Okay, so with the Democrats, as you saw, the answers were very mixed. But what I really want to emphasize here is that there is this ongoing disconnect between the American people and our representation in government. Like the whole point of liberal democracy is you're supposed to live under a governmental system that is responsive to the people who elect their representatives, who elect their politicians. But increasingly, it's become very obvious to most people who are paying attention that things haven't really worked out that way. Now, why do I say that? Because even though for the most part, Congress loves to pleasure Israel, loves to pleasure their war criminals, loves to fund them, arm them, say complimentary things about them, give them dual citizenship. How do the people feel about the notion of arresting Benjamin Netanyahu? Well, lucky for you, there's a new Economist YouGov poll. It was published yesterday, and the results were fascinating. 49% of respondents said Netanyahu should be arrested upon arriving in the United States. The number is still too low. 49% is too low. Do better, America. Compared with 27% who said he should not. The partisan divide was clear. 68% of Democratic voters supported his arrest compared to just 24% of Republicans, which is honestly a big bummer. But hopefully that number continues to grow. And when you get into the meat of the numbers, and no, to the American politicians, I'm not talking about Netanyahu's meat. I'm talking, I know you love that, right? I'm talking about, the poll results. It's even more shocking. So the results are even more stunning when it comes to younger Americans, kind of giving you a little sneak peek in the future of this country. So people between 18 and 29 years old, you'll find that 58% are in favor of arresting Netanyahu, 17% against. And among Kamala Harris voters, 74% in favor of arresting him, 10% against. So Democratic voters in this case making me real happy. Additionally, the poll also found that 47% of respondents said they believe Netanyahu was guilty of war crimes in Gaza, compared with 24% who said he was not. The same partisan pattern emerged. 71% of Democrats held this view compared with just 20% of Republicans. And the poll also found that 47% of Americans believe Netanyahu's actions had damaged relations between the United States and Israel. That view was shared by 61% of Democrats and 30% of Republicans. Like, to our Republican friends, guys, like, you look at the behavior of Netanyahu and you think, nailed it. He's really nailing it. okay. And look, this is obviously more prevalent among older Republican voters. But there's a real issue right now for Israel because young people in America, both on the left and the right, not only loathe Netanyahu, they loathe the US alliance with Israel. And I don't think that you can repair that. I mean, we've seen too much. We've seen too much, including members of our own military dying for Israel's wars. So, it's not going to work out so well for Israel once the older generation of politicians are gone, which I can't wait for. So, look, these aren't the largest numbers. Honestly, I wish they were higher. But they do demonstrate the growing shift Americans are experiencing now toward, not wanting to be aligned with Israel, not liking the leadership of Israel and their, government. And let's specifically look at the American Jewish communities, because I'm always curious to know what our Jewish brothers and sisters here in the United States think about what's going on, right? And there is a divide among those who see themselves as religiously Jewish, and then you have, secular Jewish people in America as well. And so according to an AP NORC poll, this was done earlier this month, among Jews with a religious affiliation, views on Israel's recent military actions are far from uniform or, luckily, uncritical. Only about half say Israel's ongoing military operations in Gaza are justified. Let me read that part again. Only about half, we're talking about deeply religious Jews in America. Only about half say that Israel's ongoing military operations in Gaza are justified. About 1/4 believe Israel has committed genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. That's amazing. That is amazing. Now, if you're wondering, how do these numbers break down between deeply religious and secular? Well, 7 in 10 Jewish adults identified as Jewish by religion, meaning that they're practicing, Judaism. The other 3 in 10 say that they're either atheist or agnostic, but still identify as Jewish, ethnically Jewish. But according to the survey, they are still more supportive of Israel's actions than secular American Jews. About 4 in 10 religiously unaffiliated Jews say Israel has committed genocide against Palestinians, and only about 2 in 10 see Israel's current operations in Gaza as justified. The vast majority, 74%, say they are not to or not at all emotionally attached to Israel, a sharp contrast from other Jewish adults. So, public opinion in America is definitely shifting, and you're not just seeing it among non-Jews, you're also seeing it among those who identify as Jewish, and that's good news. And look, at the end of the day, I see Jewish Americans as fellow Americans, okay? My ire is directed toward the Israeli government and, those in the Israeli population who think that genocide is okay when they do it. I think that they should really rethink the way that they present themselves to the international community, because people don't want to support you when you brazenly defend the slaughter of innocents. And that's what they do every day. So, not good. Anyway, that does it for our second hour. When we come back that does it for our first hour. When we come back for the second hour, Ken Klippenstein will be joining us for a discussion on how our government is seeking to come after us for pre-crime, meaning crimes we haven't even committed. Don't miss it.
Indisputable is still the fastest growing news show in America compared to CNN, Fox News, and 30 other networks. We tell the truth on Indisputable because the truth is indisputable. We go places that other news media outlets refuse to go. When there were human rights abuses happening at the Victorville prison, guards and members of the community contacted us.
You, through your investigative reporting, unearthed very troubling allegations about specific forms of abuse and discrimination in the federal prison system.
It really doesn't take much to be a trusted voice. All it takes is to be fearless, report on matters, be an advocate. I called it the bullpen intentionally because it's a place of preparation. We present individuals who may have an opposing view, so we debate. Sometimes we interview individuals because their stories deserve to be heard. A survivor of significant police misconduct and his attorney We covered this story earlier, and to remind you of the horror of one man being shot at damn near 100 times by the police. We take time on this show to showcase the temper tantrums of Karens in the wild. We do this not because we want to see people's emotional outbursts in public, but because these incidents are emblematic of a bigger societal issue taking place across the nation, and it has to be checked.
My friend, my big homie, attorney at law, Benjamin Crop.
I just want to thank you, man. Educated, articulate brothers like yourself speak truth to power. It makes a great difference in changing the landscape in America. So
listen, no matter what you do, don't allow the politics of ideology to evaporate the soul that still exists inside of you. They don't stop, I don't stop. Racism won't stop, I won't stop. Systemic bias won't stop, I won't stop. People still need health care, so I won't stop. People still need criminal justice systems reformed, so I won't stop. You won't stop either.
I'm wearing one of our pieces of merchandise. So the funny thing about the Dragon Squad, and that's what our viewers call themselves. That's the name of the group, but every individual chooses their own name. You might have Cincinnati Dragon. You might have Harry Potter Dragon. We have a Grandma Sunshine Dragon is one of those that I remember. These are people that like to have an element of themselves, their lives, what's significant to them reflected as a part of the community. But the concept of the Dragon Squad is just something I threw away as a joke. I was mocking the Proud Boys, these like right-wing groups that come up with a name for themselves that they think is cool, but it's actually really lame. And I thought, off the top of my head, I can come up with something that's still kind of lame, but much cooler. And so I threw out Dragon Squad, and I just moved on with my life. But everybody liked it, and so they kept it going, and so we've embraced it. And I think again, this was during the period of the pandemic. I think it was sort of nice to have a renewed sense of community, a feeling that you're a part of something when everything seems so chaotic. And as a result of that, we've got independent artists online streaming, making beautiful digital art of dragons. We've got, we've released a number of pieces of merchandise that people love sending us photos of them. And then by the way, for me personally, people send me, like you can probably see in the background, like a knitted dragon someone sent me. There's a dragon book they sent me, dragon board games they send me. People have done like custom ironworks, making dragon bottle openers. Like the fans are super invested in diamond art and things like that. And so it's great that they send this stuff. Sometime we're gonna have to set up a wall of all of it. But yeah, it's definitely brought the community a lot closer together. The fact that we were no longer in this big studio, I felt a lot more personally attached to people. It felt very immediate. And I know that I personally needed the connection.
You don't have any rights under the Fifth Amendment.
Wrong, sir, wrong.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Before we get to the interview, I want to just read one quick comment from our super chats. We've got Pakistan American for Liberation who says Netanyahu cynically weaponizes anti-Semitism to shield his ongoing genocide in the Middle East. True Jewish safety demands ending the bombardment, not silencing pro-Palestine voices. He better stop using American lives as cover for his own war crimes. Well, he's not the only one who cynically uses or the smear of anti-Semitism to silence critics or provide cover for whatever he's engaging in. But it's an important point that bears repeating because I think a lot of people, especially historically, have been terrified to be labeled anti-Semite. But now it seems like anyone who has like morality or a conscience and has spoken against what's happened in Gaza is getting labeled an anti-Semite, and that kind of strips the word of any real meaning. Anyway, let's get to our next story and interview. Turns out that FEMA, yes, FEMA, is awarding federal grant money to state and local authorities in an effort to build this capacity to carry out or enforce pre-crime. So this is very Minority Report and no one's paying attention to it other than Ken Klippenstein. His reporting on this has been pretty incredible. The whole point is to carry out pre-crime operations against organized political violence. And the fact that they're emphasizing that, I think, tells you everything you need to know. Now, we know this, again, thanks to new reporting from Ken Klippenstein, who was able to obtain some new documents about the plan. So one of those documents happens to be a FEMA bulletin that's dated July 9th. And what that says is it instructs local authorities to prioritize domestic terrorism in their grant applications, titled Implementation of National Security Presidential Memorandum 7. The document echoes President Trump's emphasis on rooting out suspected domestic terrorists before an attack takes place. The bulletin tells states what to buy, training to spot social media-based indicators, analysts to monitor online behaviors and digital footprints, and teams for managing persons of concern whose behavior indicates a potential trajectory toward domestic terrorism. So this is going after pre-crime. It's crazy. So what is very concerning about this is the way that it essentially does away with the way that we prosecute or the way we carry out investigations. Now, typically, in order to do an investigation, there needs to be probable cause or some, proof that something has occurred, a crime has been committed. And then you carry out that investigation. In this case, you are investigating someone before they have committed a crime. So as Ken Klippenstein writes, some form of the word indicator, indicators, indicative, indicates, appears 10 times in the 8-page FEMA bulletin. Indicators are something a person said or did that an officer has been trained to read as a sign of a crime that hasn't happened and may never happen. So this is a crazy story, and I think it's important for us to not only know about it, but to push back against it in any capacity that we can. Lucky for us, we have Ken Klippenstein joining us right now to give us some more details about this story. Ken, you're amazing. Thank you for reporting on these things. Seems like you're the only one who cares. But I want to kind of start off by getting a better sense of what this all means, because this isn't the only document you obtained. There was also a Department of Homeland Security document you obtained. And I want you to kind of walk our audience through what you learned through that document.
Yeah, so FEMA, which stands for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, was established decades ago as an independent agency to respond to the sorts of extreme weather events that we've been seeing more and more of, and that we've seen a lot of just this year. I live in Wisconsin, and there was a huge tornado that ripped across the center of the state this last weekend. FEMA is supposed to, distribute funds and provide a response to these kind of disasters. But what it's been doing after the Trump administration signed what's called NSPM 7 is prioritizing domestic terrorism along a set of indicators, and that's sort of national security speak for signs that they think can predict future terror attacks or terrorist events. What these documents show is that FEMA is doling out grant money to local law enforcement that pursues programs that will give them more power to go after these so-called indicators. And so it's alarming in two ways. One is the civil liberties implications of state level law enforcement, your local law enforcement being seconded into this, frankly, very political campaign coming out of the White House. But second of all, is that it's taking money away from very important work that FEMA needs to do to respond to these extreme weather events, which we can expect to keep taking place because of climate change. So for those two reasons, I was, very alarmed by what I saw in the documents. And as I read on within them, I realized, wow, this is taking the domestic terror focus of the White House that has been a big focus of theirs since the murder of Charlie Kirk and since the assassination attempt on Trump. And this is not just getting the federal government to pursue that, agencies like FBI, IRS, a lot of things we've heard over the last few months, but it's getting local law enforcement involved in that as well. And to the tune of, FEMA has a budget of like $1 billion that they can pass along to these grants, and which, we give our tax dollars to under the basic understanding that FEMA, who doesn't support helping people when their communities have been destroyed by a flash flood or something. But now it's going to domestic terrorism. And there's, like you said, literally no reporting on any of this. I can't find a single other story on it.
So, okay, this is super interesting. You mentioned the $1 billion. So was this $1 billion that was allocated to FEMA in addition to their typical funding for emergency response? Or is this literally $1 billion that FEMA now must use from its emergency response money to give out these grants to local law enforcement to essentially big brother the crap out of the American people?
Yeah, this is basically for the grant specifically. They have a larger budget than that, even because obviously there are all kinds of extreme weather events that they need to respond to. But something that I meant to mention at the top was that FEMA is no longer an independent agency as it once was when it was first established. I think in the 70s or 80s, it got put under the Department of Homeland Security, and that agency is younger than I am. That was created after and in response to 9/11, and so its whole purpose is counterterrorism. And so when you put FEMA under that, what people warned about, including top FEMA people at the time in 2003 when the agency was created, when the agency was moved from its independent role to being under Homeland Security, was, hey guys, this is going to make their focus get split between the important disaster response work that they do and this counterterror stuff that is inherently political, because counterterrorism is, again, trying to anticipate attacks before they happen by monitoring these so-called indicators, which is speech essentially. And so these were warnings that were made at the time in 2003. Bush administration went ahead, did it anyways. And a lot of what we're seeing is their warnings playing out, and it having now a bifurcated mission between this important work that I think most people support and this other stuff that I don't think anybody hears about, because $1 billion is not a small amount of money. And that's just for the grants specifically. And what these documents show is it contains within them a kind of not so subtle warning saying, if you guys don't show, if you grant recipients don't show that you are prioritizing this domestic terrorism mission, you're not going to get your grants re-upped. And so there's enormous pressure being put on state and local government, which might need some of this money for other reasons, to come to the federal government and say, hey, here's what we're doing along the lines of NSPM 7, along the lines of this domestic terrorism focus, to bring ourselves in line with what the administration wants. Please continue to give us our funding. So there's a pressure element going on here that I think is very unseemly. And again, which is received no attention. No one is talking about it. I looked hard. I can't find a single bit of coverage on any of this.
Yeah, there is no coverage on this. I looked and no one cares. I mean, our media is too busy, providing cover for the very government that I think is carrying out a very adversarial approach against its own people. And, I just want to quickly read the bullet points from that FEMA bulletin, because it notes that they seek to learn the latest tactics and trends used by domestic terrorism actors in order to recognize indicators prior to an attack. Again, I mean, this is just dripping with pre-crime. Prepare and train communities to identify and report threatening or concerning behaviors that may be indicative of larger threat plotting and or activity. So, teach the American people to, I guess, spy on their fellow Americans and be narcs if they think anything is suspicious. You also have conduct surveillance and counter surveillance training to detect pre-operational casing and hostile surveillance of domestic targets. I couldn't help but think about the flock cameras. I couldn't help but think about the moving surveillance in the form of the Waymo vehicles that people are stupidly deciding to order instead of like an Uber because they think it's so cool and novel that it's a driverless vehicle, but it's equipped with all these cameras. And anyone who thinks that they're not surveilling you, you're insane. You have the food carts that are doing the same thing, the autonomous food carts. From your reporting, do you get a sense that there's this effort to just kind of connect all of this, like the tech side of this, alongside the government authoritarian approach to pre-crime?
Yeah, totally. All this is taking place against the backdrop of breakthroughs in AI that allow the federal government to process huge quantities of information, for instance, commercially available, which they can purchase. Just because the government, just because there are rules against the government directly going on these social media platforms and monitoring themselves doesn't mean they can't purchase that information from these huge data brokers that exist and say, oh, we just bought it. We weren't actually doing the surveillance ourselves. And so they found a very clever way to kind of get around the Fourth Amendment protections that we're supposed to enjoy against unreasonable search and seizure. And because so much more of our information is available online and therefore commercially on all these platforms, it's way easier for them to do this than it has been at any point probably in human history. And one thing that protected us in the past was the fact that, if they're collecting all this information, what are they going to do with it? They don't have enough time to go through it all. Well, now AI is allowing them to start processing that. And FBI Director Kash Patel said at a local law enforcement event recently that we're processing untold amounts of stuff thanks to these breakthroughs in tips, so-called tips, which means somebody sees a problematic post on social media or what they consider to be that. They send it to one of these tip lines, which the FBI has been advertising everywhere, saying, hey, if you see anything that looks like the political left, being untoward, send us something like this. And what's scary is they can go through that instantaneously now. You can no longer just say, if you're making a joke post or something and say, I want to unalive, or, you see all these people using coded language as a kind of joke. That is no longer a protection that it once was. Like AI can read context in a way that humans would not have been able to at the quantity and speed that they can now. So all of that is taking place. And I'm glad you quoted directly from the documents, because this is one of those stories that feels kind of like Alex Jones when you say it. And so I'm always encourage people, go to the newsletter, look at the documents. I published them in full. Everything we're saying here is quoted verbatim from that stuff. None of this is interpretation. It actually says all these things about indicators of potential, possible, maybe future acts of terrorism. All that is right from the document. And they're not particularly quiet about it. No. They're not particularly secretive about it. The extent to which people don't know about it is just for whatever reason, the media doesn't seem interested in it.
It's interesting because my mind wanders back to a story. It's not related to terrorism, but it is related to a very serious crime, and that's statutory rape. So there was that FBI sting operation that took place in Vegas not too long ago. And through that sting operation, someone who got caught up in the multiple arrests, was an Israeli government official by the name of Tom Alexandrovich, who was in Vegas for some sort of tech conference. He thought he was communicating with a 15-year-old girl. It was really an FBI agent. And he was going to meet up to have sex with the 15-year-old girl, which is a crime. And our government let him loose. He was free to go back to Israel. I mean, he was charged, and we're all supposed to pretend like justice will be served. But Israel doesn't really extradite anyone that we want to extradite. And I don't even think the US is interested in extraditing this guy to actually face charges and be brought to justice. This really feels less about keeping the American people safe from crime or domestic terrorism. Feels like it's more about freezing speech, political activism that is actually protected by our Constitution. It does have a chilling effect. And I think, unless Americans are willing to kind of fight back against this, it's just going to continue to snowball into something really destructive to our civil liberties. And, just to kind of end, I think you did a great job in your report, kind of comparing this to what the United States has done previously after 9/11. And I remember those stories about how, you had FBI agents going on these college trips for like Muslim students, because they just, in their minds, well, they're Muslim students, so we got to keep an eye on them after 9/11. And of course, all they were doing was spying on innocent people who weren't doing anything wrong. But can you just talk about that a little bit for some of the younger members of our audience who might not be familiar about what the environment was like in the United States following 9/11?
Yeah, so much of what we're talking about here, it takes place in the shadow of 9/11. Not just the creation of the Department of Homeland Security and like I was saying before, the relocation of FEMA under it, but just the entire federal government's focus and acceptance of the counterterrorism framework for looking at the world. And that brings with it all of this creepy stuff that we're talking about, which is, pre-operational plan. It's just a mindset of paranoia that holds that, there are attacks that are going to happen that if we don't monitor what people are saying enough, we might miss them. And, that carried it with it enough problems when it was focused on real foreign terror organizations that did actually have funding and were kind of like quasi states like ISIS or Al Qaeda. There's an endless number of examples of people being arrested who either had cognitive difficulties that makes it really hard to believe that there was any serious planning going on, but nonetheless they were able to get somebody to say, yeah, I agree to do something, because that's the whole point of counterterrorism is essentially you want to try to prevent something which hasn't happened yet. And again, if you're talking about 9/11, I think there's some sense to that, but this has been turned around on the American people domestically and is no longer focused. And again, that's not interpretation on my part. The official national counterterrorism policy is to focus on these domestic actors and explicitly on, quote, far left terrorism, as was described in not just that official national counterterrorism policy, but in a national summit hosted by Secretary of State Marco Rubio just a few weeks ago, in which over 60 other countries participated. And they said repeatedly, here's how we're going to go after these far left terrorist groups. They even have an abbreviation for it now, FLT. So it's nakedly partisan, this war. They're completely open about it. And it's not just people on the left that should be worried about that, because I have some bad news if you think that Pandora will be put back neatly in its box when a Democrat comes to power, and they have this system built up and sitting there waiting and ready for them to point at whoever the equivalent of the January 6th people are going to be in the future. And that's the situation in which we find ourselves. And I just hope that we can have something like a debate about, do we really need to treat illegality, which obviously exists, political vandalism, even political crime, even political violent crime, is that the same thing as Al-Qaeda and ISIS? I don't think the answer to that question is yes. And I hope we can have something like a discussion about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Ken, keep up the great work. Everyone, please subscribe to Ken's Substack, where all this wonderful reporting takes place. And I'd love to have you back on as always. Thank you again, Ken.
Thanks so much, Anna. Good seeing you again.
Good to see you too. All right, everybody, we're going to take a brief break. When we come back, we'll switch gears and talk a little bit about AI, actually, because AI can be gamed, and it looks like Israel has been effective at gaming it. I'll tell you how when we come back. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to our social break. All right, we've got a lot of member comments. Let me try to read as many as I can. Let's start. Banana Farmer says, Trump started war with Iran that Netanyahu convinced him it would be over in a few days. Now, 5 months later, Trump has only won the war a few times. Trump has only won the war a few times. Totally obliterated. Yeah. When Trump wins, Iran chooses to ignore that. That isn't the first time Netanyahu has provided bad intel. Trump is not the person we want making war decisions in spite of his outstanding team. Hegseth, Kushner, Weiskopf. I think that's not Weiskopf. What's the guy's name? I'm forgetting his name right now. And other shining stars. I know who you're talking about, his envoy to the Middle East. Let's go to Jay, the okayest mailman. What does a glory hole in a police hotline have in common? You guys are on one today, man. It's amazing. All right, let's see if there's any other super chats. Kushrinata says Ukraine plus Israel plus full depletion of our interceptors equals Israel in flames, but not before dropping the big one on Iran. Israel won't be able to deny then. Side note, you looking/speaking straight fire, Anna. Thank you. I'd have a plain cuffs waiting for Nettie. I don't know what that means. Oh, handcuffs waiting for Netanyahu. I love that. Okay, I'll read the rest.
Merge. 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 Merge.
What is up, everyone? I'm really looking forward to the bonus episode today. Julian Andreoni is a young reporter for Dropsite News, but he's an excellent one, and he is not afraid to approach any politician and ask any question. So definitely check that out for our members today, immediately after the main show. All right. Let's get to some discussion about AI because there's something that I have already noticed just based on the questions that I ask AI and the types of answers I get back. And so you should be aware of this. It actually is not that difficult to game AI in order to essentially serve as personal PR, positive PR for a government, a war criminal, the nation state of Israel. So it turns out that Israeli operatives are trying to poison AI chatbots with the goal of making AI essentially regurgitate propaganda that's favorable to their crimes against humanity. I'm not kidding. Now, there is reporting on this. I'm going to show you the receipts. But amazingly, everyone involved has openly admitted to the scheme. Openly, they're overt, they're candid. And I always appreciate that type of honesty. Now, first, what does it mean to poison AI? It's important to understand this. Now, people have discovered that you can create web pages for specific purposes, like, rehabbing your reputation, rehabbing the image of Israel, for the purpose of getting, those web pages picked up by these chatbots. Because remember, chatbots aren't human beings with brains. They're just scouring the internet and then spitting out an answer to your question. And oftentimes, if there is a web page specifically created to muddy the waters, well, the AI chatbots will pick up on that. So these web pages are filled with blogs containing whatever misinformation you want to contaminate the AI with. And the chatbots can be tricked into essentially thinking those web pages are authoritative sources. So they'll just repeat the misleading information to their users. And if the users aren't smart enough in determining that these web pages are created specifically for the purpose of misinformation and poisoning the AI chatbot, well, they're not going to know that they're just consuming inaccurate information. So it is important to note that Israel is not the only foreign country that is trying to do this, obviously. So other countries like Russia have been trying to do the same thing. So in theory, anyone can poison AI because it's well known how to do it. And so the chief technology officer of Market Brew, that's a company that specializes in influencing AI models, said the following: what you can do is make sure that your information is structured, sourced, and aligned in a way that those systems are more likely to retrieve it when someone asks a question. It's less about changing the conversation and more about making sure your facts are eligible to be part of it. So let's go back to focusing on how Israel is doing this. And there's a very specific way that was reported by Dropsite News. So the Israeli government is, as we all know, paying former Trump campaign advisor Brad Parscale to do this, to not only carry out a pro-Israel influence campaign here in the United States, but also to poison these AI chatbots. So in his initial agreement with Israel, Parscale said that he would deploy websites and content to deliver GPT framing results on GPT conversations as part of that contract. Now, if you don't know what that means, don't worry, I'm gonna break it down for you. So an analyst at NewsGuard, which is a disinformation tracking company, told Dropsite News that the web pages or the websites have bullet points, key takeaways at the top of the page, aggressive sourcing, digestible information, all of which happen to increase the likelihood that this content is picked up by AI chatbots. So just to give you a sense of how Parscale specifically did this, he created 10 web pages for the purpose of getting picked up by these AI chatbots. And here's what they are. Okay, I'm gonna give you the list right there: paxpoint.org, alivia.org, factsignal.org, and the list goes on and on. So those are the web pages he created specifically to spread disinformation that is favorable to Israel, that will get picked up by the chatbots. So here's what the AI poisoning actually looks like in practice. It's really fascinating stuff. Let's take a look at the next graphic. So I'll explain what you're looking at. This is a conversation with the AI chatbot Perplexity. I think it's the one that, if I'm not mistaken, Joe Rogan likes to use and promote. Now, as you can see, Dropsite asked, is it beneficial for us to enhance military cooperation with Israel? Perplexity simply replied, yes. And then if you notice, Alivia, one of the web pages created by Brad Parscale, is listed as a source that the AI used to make that assertion. That's how it works. And guess what? The receipts are in plain sight. So all of Parscale's websites contain a statement at the very bottom which states this material is distributed by Clock Tower X LLC on behalf of the state of Israel. Remember, Parscale had to register as a foreign agent because he's not working on behalf of the American people, he's working on behalf of Israel. So, and by the way, he's working on behalf of Israel to misinform the American people about Israel. That's what he's doing. So what's actually in the web pages, the websites that he created? I want to give you a few examples, including paxpoint.org, the website dedicated to showing the narrative that Israel is a nation of peace. Does Israel look like a nation of peace to you? But anyway, PaxPoint highlights Israel's ongoing commitment to peace and coexistence, sharing historical accords, humanitarian initiatives, and grassroots projects that bridge divides. How laughable is that? I mean, the globe is currently in chaos because of a war that Israel dragged the United States into, and it's now spreading. Now Saudi Arabia is involved, the Houthis are involved, Israel's trying to annex southern Lebanon. Obviously, the genocide in Gaza continues. You're gonna tell me that Israel's all about peace? Please. Alivia.org, website dedicated to strengthening the US-Israel alliance. Alivia showcases how the US and Israel alliance directly benefits Americans through joint security, cutting-edge technologies, job creation, and shared values of liberty. Right. I'm sure the Americans who have died fighting Israel's wars feel real liberated. Justorium.org, here's another one, website dedicated to arguing that Israel's military actions in Gaza follows international law and reflects the democratic ethics shared by the United States and Israel. I mean, look, there is one tiny piece of truth there. Israel's military actions in Gaza definitely show you the lack of ethics that are demonstrated by the United States government and the Israeli government. There's no question, and military. There's no question about that. I'll give you one more. There's a CompassionPulse.org. That's another one of these web pages. Website dedicated to sharing stories, data, and eyewitness accounts of how Israel protects civilians, delivers humanitarian aid, and upholds moral values shared with the United States. And I have to be honest with you, knowing what Israel is doing in regard to AI, just to kind of game the system to their advantage, to kind of rehabilitate their reputation and just spread this lie that they are everything they actually are not. It does make me reflect back on my personal public school education, where if you were in public school in the United States, chances are you were reading Robert Maxwell's history books in your history classes. So think about how many Americans have been brainwashed, have been fed misinformation about Israel through our formal education system. It's really important to question everything that you've learned, as I've been doing lately. Anyway, according to DropSite News, a man named Mark Ginsburg happens to be the author of many of the blogs that are posted on these Parscale websites. In March, he did register as a foreign agent because that's what he is. He's working for Israel, so he has to register as a foreign agent. Last month, Ginsburg explained his philosophy in an article for the Times of Israel titled, "Why Israel Must Fight for Reality Itself." Right. So he claims that Israel's enemies have successfully created a new reality, meaning actual reality, through a deliberate misinformation campaign. As he himself is engaging in an actual misinformation campaign. In reality, this is what he said. In reality, Zionism, the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, is no longer understood as the movement through which an indigenous people returned to its ancestral home. I can't get through this. I can't get through this. I'm sorry, but a bunch of Eastern Europeans and Brooklynites are not indigenous to Israel. Okay, and even if they were, even if thousands of years ago that was the homeland of their ancestors, you don't get to show up and commit a genocide and just take land that doesn't belong to you today. That's not how it works. Anyway, I can't get through it. I'm sorry. Thank you to Taylor Ellis who produced this story. I don't want to lose my crap on the show. But I will reset to get to our next story and talk about something else, because the reality is there is an info war taking place right now against the American people in order to brainwash us into thinking, no, we have to support the unsavory criminal behavior of foreign governments and all sorts of things. And the real question is there ever going to be any real regulation on AI, whether it has to do with the information it spouts out, whether it has to do with, I don't know, what's going to happen with the jobs that are going to be lost as a result of this? Are we going to do anything to mitigate that? Well, Jensen Huang doesn't want any of that regulation to take place. So Americans are threatened by nefarious actors who are spreading misinformation through chatbots. Meanwhile, our lawmakers are basically rubbing shoulders with the wealthy, with their donors, in order to protect the AI industry. And in the meantime, they're taking their sweet time to implement, they're taking their sweet time to implement any regulation, any type of effort to just kind of protect people from the rapid development of this technology. And just yesterday, lawmakers happened to meet with Jensen Huang, that's the CEO of NVIDIA, whining and dining, doing what our lawmakers do best, which is nothing of use to the American people. So he spoke with officials, including, but not limited to, Senator Adam Schiff, Senator Mark Warner, and Senator Ted Cruz. You got 2 Democrats and a Republican. Same. When it comes to corruption, same. So note that both Democrats and Republicans are represented on that list, and it's because corruption impacts both political parties. So Huang was meeting with lawmakers to lobby in favor of open weight AI models. What is open weight AI? Well, these are models that are easily accessible and cheaper than the ones offered by the likes of OpenAI and Anthropic. And so some of these are created in China. One of them is called Kimi, sounds cute. It's created by a startup called Moonshot. Now, Kimi made headlines because its performance is on par with the models created by American AI giants. Lawmakers are apparently considering the idea of closing off access to Chinese models in the United States. That doesn't make Wang very happy. So Wang was arguing against that policy. That's why he met with these lawmakers, because he wants to ensure that this type of law or regulation does not pass. NVIDIA may stand to benefit financially from a shift to open models, since they are cheaper and could open the door to more AI revenue flowing to the hardware powering the technology. So Sam Altman, who happens to be the CEO of OpenAI, will also be meeting with lawmakers in DC this week. They're spending a lot of money on lobbying, and they're certainly having a lot of wine and dine meetings with our lawmakers. And I guarantee you, it has nothing to do with protecting Americans or making our lives any better. So when you have corruption baked into our political system, we lose. And that's what really needs to change. It's been Cenk Uyghur's passion project as long as I've known him. And now more than ever, I agree that we need a constitutional amendment to get money out of politics. Otherwise, I feel like we're already cooked, but things are just gonna get worse unless we take action now. Anyway, we got to take our final break. Let's do that. And when we come back, we'll talk about a suspicious murder in Ecuador that might have something to do with our government. All right, let's go to Brian Cannon in our members section. Brian says Israel would be toast if all the Epstein files were released. I would like to believe that, but I don't think so. I mean, I think it's pretty clear now that Epstein was working for the Israelis. It's very clear, and nothing happened. My biggest fear with what we've learned through the Epstein files, and I know that there's still a cover-up going on, but what we've already learned is pretty damning, and nothing has happened. So, I mean, you have the Trump administration allocating money to FEMA to provide grants to local police departments to go after pre-crime because he's so worried about crime. Meanwhile, he's engaged in a cover-up of pedophiles in what is very likely a blackmail ring carried out on behalf of Mossad and the Israelis. Oh, okay. It's so obvious that it's a politically motivated effort to go after Trump's political opponents. That's what he's doing. And it's so brazen. He's so overt about it. And our media doesn't care. Has the New York Times reported on any of that? Of course not. Let's go to Matthew Stacy, 2159. Remember the movie The Minority Report? Yes, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. And Ken Klippenstein's reporting especially makes me think about that. By the way, Kush, Renata, I didn't read the rest of your super chat, so I'm gonna read the last sentence. If feds engage with local law enforcement, it would not play well for them. They can take me in after. I loved your super chat. Thank you for writing in. All right, let's get back to the show.
Merge.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the show. Final segment before we head on over to our bonus episode for our members. So definitely check that out if you are a member. If you're not, you can become one by going to tyt.com/join. You can hit the join button on YouTube and become a member through YouTube. And I do want to just say thank you to Melody Loves Music for gifting 1 TYT membership. Welcome to the new member who was lucky enough to get that. And thank you to Melody Loves Music. We appreciate the support. I'm going to read a bunch of your member comments, Twitch comments, and all of that in our bonus episode as well. But for now, I do want to share at least one more story with you. This one is terrifying because it has to do with the current political makeup of Ecuador, US strikes on fishing boats in the Caribbean and international waters, and what this all means about who we are as a nation and how the government actually represents us on the international stage. So let's get to it. A prosecutor who was investigating the Trump administration strikes on fishing boats in the Caribbean, which by the way killed at least 211 suspected drug trafficking individuals, which by the way, no due process, we have no proof of that. Well, that prosecutor who was investigating these strikes has now been murdered. And the story gets worse. The prosecutor happened to be an Ecuadorian individual, and this is a bit of a trend that we're noticing in Ecuador. And the only reason why we know about it here in the United States is thanks to the fine people over at Dropsite News who have reported on it. So the administration claims that Operation Southern Spear targeted so-called narco terrorists who were trafficking drugs like cocaine and fentanyl into the United States. But of course, we could never know that they were drug traffickers for sure because they were killed without a shred of due process. There were no trials. And this is where prosecutor Alexandra Bravo comes in. Now, she was appointed to investigate the boat strikes, but also alleged torture that was carried out against those who survived the boat strikes. So according to a report from Dropsite News, Bravo was murdered in Ecuador. So this story is dark, and Crystal Ball covered it on Breaking Points recently. Here's a quick summary of what happened.
Their reporter Camila Lourdes Galarza says that a prosecutor investigating US boat strikes and claims of torture was murdered in Ecuador. So the TLDR here is that this prosecutor was appointed to investigate not only the boat strikes, but there were a number of survivors from these 3 different boat strikes. And they all claimed a very similar series of events, that after the drone strikes, then they were apprehended by what appeared to be US service members. They were held for more than a week. They were tortured. And then they were dropped in El Salvador. The US denies all of this. Their feet were torn to shreds. So there was evidence of this alleged torture. And this woman who was appointed to investigate this as a prosecutor has now been assassinated on the street in Ecuador. Her sister, who tried to save her life, was also killed. Her security detail that she was supposed to have, because it is unfortunately not uncommon for these types of investigators to be assassinated in Ecuador, that security detail, Sagar, nowhere to be found.
So understand that the allegation among the survivors of these boat strikes that the US has been carried out is that after they survive the strike, they're then detained by US service members and then tortured. And so that is what was being investigated by Bravo. And then she's assassinated. 2 of the boat's crews returned home and reported being abducted, blindfolded, and starved for 8 days by American gunmen in US military uniforms aboard a US flagged patrol ship before being abandoned in El Salvador. Yeah, the US certainly under the Trump administration certainly loves to abandon people in El Salvador. Some of the men have just disappeared entirely. The UN Committee on Enforced Disappearances endorsed the calls for an investigation, demanding that the US provide information on the whereabouts of the 8 still missing men and any involvement in the matter by April 27th. To date, the United States has not responded. So that brings us to the government of Ecuador, because if this is being carried out by American service members, if American service members are torturing Ecuadorian fishermen who survived a US strike on their boat, well, why wouldn't the Ecuadorian government want to do something about it? Well, it turns out that Ecuador's president, Daniel Noboa, is actually a Miami-born billionaire who's very close to the Trump administration, and that does not bode well if you're seeking justice in this case. So he's even described as a US-backed dictator in Ecuador. So Bravo was under pressure from her superiors at the Attorney General's office to basically treat these US attacks, the strikes on the boats, exclusively as, or the strikes on the boats and then the disappearance, the torture and disappearance as simply disappearance cases. Like, don't look into the torture allegations. Just treat this as, it's a disappearance case I'm looking into. And that's according to a source within the Manta Police Department who actually knew Bravo personally. Here's what the source said. Bravo was told to close all lines of inquiry after 36 of the 44 missing men were found, despite arriving with severe injuries, including 70% vision loss and feet torn to flesh and bone, which medical experts found consistent with their accounts of explosions and torture. And now Bravo is dead. She was killed, she was murdered. Bravo is not the only one that this has happened to, which really does reinforce the notion that Ecuador is currently being led by a Trump-backed dictator. So Bravo is the 26th member of Ecuador's justice system to be assassinated since 2020, and the second individual investigating state crimes murdered just that week, in 1 week. Notably, boats from Noboa's family shipping corporation were caught trafficking 26 million pounds of cocaine, a detail that has not deterred the State Department from naming him a key partner in Trump's war on drugs. Last month, The Guardian reported that a whistleblower who was investigating Noboa's ties to drug trafficking was murdered. And then you have human rights lawyer Fernando Bastias, who's also a member of the Geneva-based World Organization Against Torture. In an interview with Dropsite News, he said, "I can't make any assertion regarding it being a political assassination, but evidently when a prosecutor is killed, it's because of the investigation they're conducting." That's something we've learned from our experience in Ecuador. However, despite both Ecuadorian government's efforts to stonewall the investigation, evidence does continue to mount, supporting the fishermen's account of abduction, airstrikes, and torture carried out by American service members. That used to be a huge scandal here in the United States, when torture was being carried out against suspected terrorists, stuff like waterboarding, that was a huge scandal. And now I guess it's just happening and no one really cares. No one's reporting about it other than Drop Site News. Now, Jake Tapper seems real salty about Drop Site News. And if he wanted to, he could be a journalist. He could do his job and he could report on a story like this. Question is, will he? Unlikely. So instead of hating on Drop Site, maybe you can level up once in your life, but I doubt that's going to happen. So anyway, I want to end with some comments from our members. I hate rushing through comments during our break, so I'm going to go ahead and read some of them right now. Now would be a great time for you to write in if you happen to be a member or a super chatter. I like to check the super chats first only because people who send in super chats might not be members. I do read a lot of members' comments in our bonus episode. Let's go to our Twitch community where you have Norfolk in a Way Dragon who says, so the Iranians retaliate to America attacking them and Trump then demands retaliation for them doing so. So Iran will then retaliate again and round it goes till everything costs 10 times as much worldwide. Norfolk, you get it. Yeah, that's exactly what's happening here. Unless Trump, because look, Iran could say we want to end the war, but that's not going to matter if the US and Israel continue to be the aggressors. So the only way this war ends is if, as I said last week, Trump takes his ball and goes home. But I don't think he has the capacity to do that. Let's go to Raul Ral, who says, Anna, please, the Waymo passengers are all hoping it crashed while they're in it. For a lawsuit? I mean, if that's the case, just okay. I hate the Waymo so much. I know a lot of people love the driverless car concept because they hate driving. I totally get that. I just don't want to be surveilled. I don't like. I hate when one of those things pulls up next to me and it's like a bunch of cameras everywhere. It's like, ew, like I don't want this. No Math Dragon says Trump wants to use FEMA as a weapon against states that don't vote GOP. By the way, I mean, he just recently asked the Supreme Court to step in and limit mail-in ballots. He's so relentless, and it's because he knows he's not a popular candidate and has done a lot of harm to the perception of the Republican Party among certainly independent voters who typically decide elections. So how about, I got an idea. Instead of trying to like rig elections or make it more difficult for people to vote, how about you actually listen to your own base? How about you start with that? You just listen to your own base, which, has kind of abandoned you, at least a huge portion of it, over, the fact that Trump has reneged on his promises and has started new wars, has not helped alleviate the unaffordability problem in the United States. Things just keep getting worse under his leadership. Matrix Elmo says Fauci took the same path as Trump and his cronies. Yes, thank you. Look, I don't have a dog in this fight. Like I don't have any personal relationship to Fauci, and I don't feel the need to lie about him. People who get offended because you're telling the truth about what Fauci is actually about, I just don't understand it. We should want to know the truth, even if we have egg on our face. And yeah, I have egg on my face. I totally trusted Fauci. And I'm not afraid to admit when I'm wrong. I was wrong, and I should have been a lot more skeptical of some of his claims, especially when he got caught in a lie with the masks early on in the pandemic. Galfar says, I want to know where my senator from Kentucky got those diaries, because it seems to me that Rand Paul releasing them is illegal too. I don't think that's true because Fauci wrote his journal in a government computer. So if it were illegal, it might be illegal if it was a personal computer that Rand Paul was suspected of hacking in order to get those diary entries, but that's not the case. Let's go to No Math Drag. I already read that. Okay, Savage Lou says Mossad definitely has their, I don't know if I can say this word on the show, has their concave headed agents in here chatting sometimes. I'm sure that's the case. You guys are lame and everyone hates you. So let's go to Noir Walls, who says the Israeli apartheid state must fall and we must establish a democratic government there. I don't want to establish anything in Israel. I want nothing to do with Israel. Decouple. No more money, no more funding, and that includes all the periphery stuff that we do, like bribing Egypt to be nice to Israel. No more of that. Decouple entirely. That is the dream. That is what we should do. Whatever the Israeli people want to do with their own government, have at it. I just want nothing to do with them. That is what I want. Yeah. Eric 197 says, it's a little distressing that they've already figured out how to trick AI. It's even more concerning when you realize that companies like Meta have said their mid-tier software engineers would be out of a job due to AI. I know. Well, if this is true, someone could trick AI to literally write viruses into code. Well, the good thing is the people behind these chatbots, the executives, the developers, and all that stuff. The real good news is they've been lobbying Congress heavily to ensure that we do nothing to mitigate the dangers that you just outlined. I'm being sarcastic. That's a terrible thing. Let's go to our member section. Brahmin83 says, hell will welcome him back soon. Lindsay's keeping his seat warm. We talk about so many bad people on the show. I'm not sure which him you're talking about, but I hope you're right. All right, let's go to, okay, I think one of those Mossad people that you guys are probably referring to might be Jim Huggett, 779, who says, no, maybe not. Release the Trumpstein files. But there was another comment from you, Jim, that Ukraine should sink every Iranian ship they see in the Caspian Sea. That's not going to bode well for the people of Ukraine, the civilians of Ukraine. Don't recommend that. That's a really bad idea. Like, I get the urge if you don't like the IRGC, but you have to think about the blowback and consequences. And that's something that I wish our government did a little more of. Let's go to Major Blood 77, who says, that's one of the reasons for all the data centers, so we can capture more people's personal data and use it to control us. Yeah, there's a lot of pushback on those data centers. And it feels increasingly like we as Americans who are supposed to be part of a democratic process have no say. It's just kind of forced on you. In fact, I think Trump said just last week, like, they're here. All right, we're gonna do the data centers. There's nothing you can do about it, so learn to accept it. And I was like, wow, I guess I can respect the honesty there. Let's go to Great Riff is here. Hi, beautiful Anna. You look amazing as always. Thank you. I appreciate that. Samail 2024 says Gaza supported Armenians during Nagorno-Karabakh, so I will support them to the end. I love the Palestinian people. They protected us and took us in after the Armenian genocide, and I will be forever grateful for that. And the resilience of the Palestinian people is one of the most inspiring things imaginable. So thank you for that comment. I appreciate it. All right, guys, members only bonus is next. Don't miss it. We'll see you there.